Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Your Intention Matters, the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us on this one. My name, of course, is still Paul Madot. And today I am thrilled I have Adam J back. Adam, welcome back, man. It's been a long 3 years down in Miami. How are things?
It's been a long time. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Things are well, man. A lot of change, a lot of good stuff going on. But super happy to be here.
Well, listen, I appreciate you being here. You know, it's funny. I always, whenever I have a guest on, I usually like to introduce their title. And I was putting in my notes before this session, and I was prepared to say Chief Revenue Officer at Falcon, but you provided me with some insight that my information is stale dated. So talk to me.
It is stale dated. Depending on when this launches, we'll see. But as of right now, it's stale dated by about a week. I made the decision to go all in on meat, Paul. It's I've worked in startup land for the better part of 15 years. Been very fortunate to build out some of the best B2B SaaS companies out there. But ultimately, what the pandemic taught me is that I need to bet on myself. I have a huge passion for helping as many people as I can. I've always done some fractional stuff on the side and some leadership coaching on the side. But that's what I love to do. And if I could help more than one founder at a time, transition away from founder-led sales, build out a sales team in, what I've always felt is important, but what has now been highlighted over the past few years of a scalable, repeatable, and responsible manner being the key word. It's a mission that I'm super proud of. So I'm excited to, work with multiple clients and, help as many folks that are going to become the next generation of sales leaders as I can.
You know, Adam, I want to talk to you about this. I'm fascinated about your decision, and it kind of ties in, as we were talking about, to the title of my podcast, because it's called Your Intention Matters. And it's really like my mindset is that nothing is given to any of us, whether you're in a sales role or anything else. And it all starts with mindset and intention. And as you're talking about your decision, just recently, I want to talk to you about this because it takes me back to when I worked at Xerox for about a decade. And I was in sales across the board. I was a sales rep. I was a sales manager. I was in the training division for a long time as well. And when I decided to break the link between me and Xerox and start up my company, SOAR Training Now, and kind of do my own thing, that was not an overnight decision by any means. I was in my mid-30s. I was completely single, no kids, no relationship. But I had the spreadsheet where, how much money do I have? What's it going to take, et cetera. And there was all kinds of thoughts that I had. I also had to think about, well, do I really want to leave this major global corporation branch? Because once you're there, it's hard to let go. But it was just me that I had to answer to. I know you're married, you have a child. And so I'm curious about your decision. Was it a long thought process, or was it just, let's do this and let's go? And talk to me about that.
I wish it was just let's go. So I have a wife. We've been married almost 2 years. I have a 12-year-old that I have 50% of the time. And just like everyone else that's listening, right? I have a house payment, a car payment, prepaid tuition for the kid, and all the other bills that we all have. It wasn't an easy decision. It certainly was intentional. I'd say I'd been toying with it for the better part of a year. Even before I took my role at Falcon, I didn't feel that the market was right. And like everyone else who's ever gone out on their own, I was and am scared shitless that I'm never going to make a dollar. But I also am very confident in what I offer and what I bring, that I'm willing to bet on myself. I don't know how we ultimately came to the decision, but I remember my wife works for a company that does BDR outsourcing. So she's in the tech space as well. And she leads all of their operations. And we started talking about what it would look like if I were to go out on my own. And we started talking about the clients that I've been working with over the years, and both on the fractional side and the coaching side. And What would that look like from an income perspective? And it's funny, you talk about the spreadsheet that you had. We have the exact same thing. No one does the spreadsheet better than my wife. And we literally we put down every bill, every penny that we spend. We would go through our Amex statements and look at like, all right, we spent this on this category and this on this category. Where could we scale back if we need to? And what do we need to bring in collectively for both of us? I'm blessed. I'm very fortunate that my wife makes a good living, and that we have a decent amount of savings that we were able to make this decision. And I planned on having no income for 6 to 9 months. Knock on wood. We're only a week in. I've already surpassed that goal of no income. So we're good there. But it has to be an intentional decision. And what I think I realized, Paul, through the pandemic, I was always that person that chased both title and money. We might have talked about it on our first podcast, but like I have shiny object syndrome, right? Like, oh, it's the next best thing. And like, oh, that's a cool technology. I'm going to go work there because they offered me a little bit more money. And what I realized is money isn't everything. Time with my family, time with my kid, being able to travel, and ultimately being able to help as many people as possible is what was that like defining moment of like, do I do this? And I remember when I had the decision, the night I made the decision, was a night I got a Slack message at like 2:45 in the morning. I happened to not put my phone on do not disturb. Who the message was from, what the message was, doesn't matter. But it was this epiphany moment of I'm done. Like I can't do this anymore. And here we are.
Adam, it's funny that you're talking about this right now because I listened to the podcast that you and I recorded back in June of 20, and I listened to it yesterday, and then I was taking some notes going into this session today, and I remembered our podcast from yesterday, and you had some good runs with was it Hologic, I think, for 7 years or so, Shire for P Clubs and so on, like some long tenures with some companies. And when I was taking a look at your LinkedIn profile this morning before this podcast recording, since we got together, you had just started at Spot On, and then you went to Swag Up, Reprise, On Cue, but they were much shorter runs.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, I wonder what happened there. And so how conscious were you about making those changes, without having the 7-year runs and the 4-year runs at the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a question that comes up in every interview I ever have. Is like, holy shit, dude, like on paper, you look risky. Some of them were COVID related. Spot On was COVID related. Reprise was a layoff that was COVID related. So it was being in arguably the wrong place at the wrong time. But some of them, like when you look at Swag Up and OnCue, were very, very conscious decisions. Of leaving an organization better than I found it when I got there, of knowing when my skill set was exhausted, or knowing when there was just a mismatch to go forward. And one of the things that I think, and I talk about this a lot, that I pride myself on, is not just leaving places better than when I started, but it's still having relationships with the executive team and the CEOs from when I left, and still being able to call on them, forget being able to use them as a reference for another job, but being able to like call on them for advice, being able to still be in a position where they will call on me and have me come and talk to their team or come and sit in on an executive meeting and provide insight. I think it's important to, especially in today's day and age, be deliberate with your decisions. But that said, I actually posted about this on LinkedIn the other day. Like the old stigma is, oh, if you're at a job less than 3 years or 5 years, like you're a job hopper, right? And I think, we have to get away from that and realize that, certainly post-pandemic, but it's very common now for people to be places 12, 14, 18 months. And make a decision to leave for, be it a better opportunity, more pay. I've never left for just more pay, different scope and role, the company changes, funding changes, whatever it happens to be. I think it's really important that we understand the story when we're looking at people's resumes, and we don't just assume that, oh, they were there 6 months, like they're a job hopper. I mean, LinkedIn doesn't allow, and they should, product feedback, if anyone from LinkedIn is listening, they should allow a reason for why you left. Because I think you'll see a lot of, layoff, a lot of role changes, a lot of reduction in force, a lot of, better opportunity for XYZ. To me, one of them was to go from being a VP of sales of a division to running, the entire sales team and scaling it out from the ground up. And it was a new challenge. And for me, it's always about the challenge.
It's so funny that you talk about the perception of that, because I had this conversation as we were recording this, I don't know, about a week ago or so. And I'd said almost the same thing, where when you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile as an example, and you see they've had 4 company jobs, or they've worked at 4 different companies over a 3-year period or a 6-year period, it almost appears negative on that person. And yet there's no real conversation about, well, what was wrong with the company environment? Like, what was the fact? It's almost like there's no consideration to, well, maybe the environment was the catalyst for that, and there was good reason for it, as opposed to this person is a risk.
I was just talking about this with the founder the other day. It's historically so taboo when people leave, but you hit the nail on the head, Paul. Like, when you look at these companies, was it a funding issue? Was it a toxic work environment? Was it a management issue? Was it a role change? Like, what happened there? We do so much interviewing of individuals when they change roles, and so much criticizing of their resumes, but we don't look at the companies. I think that is changing, though. Certainly in interviews I do, and certainly sales leaders I speak with, and there's sites out there such as RepView. I am not a paid advisor for RepView, but that do highlight companies, and not just like RepView does a great job on what percentage of people are hitting their quota, what percentage of people, are ramping properly, et cetera, et cetera. But there's sites out there, and people are really starting to look at company reputation when people leave. And it's an important note for companies, I think, because it makes hiring that much harder. It used to be that, hey, like, you're the person who left a job, right? Like, your resume is going to make it hard for you to get hired. Now, like, that certainly still plays, but now what you'll see is, I don't know if I want to work here, because you have a reputation of churning and burning through people that don't say very good things about your company.
Adam, in your last role at Falcon, when you reach the CRO level, that's a sizable responsibility. Your hands are in a lot of different buckets, and you're responsible for pretty big portion of the direction of the organization. And so your decision to move on and bet on yourself, I'm curious about the conversation with Falcon. Was that an easier one for you than you thought? Were you kind of excited about what's in front of you? Were you nervous to tell them? And what'd you go through in terms of having that conversation with them about your decision to move on?
So for me, it was very easy. I think that it was the right decision, and one that I'd thought about. And I think that with what we accomplished and what the team was able to do in the time that I was there, from what I had inherited, and nothing negative about anyone who was there before me. It's just different stages of growth. I felt very comfortable having the conversation of why it was an okay time, what we have done, and more importantly, what that transition is going to look like to make sure that the team is still set up for success. I'm still super close with my team from Falcon. It's one of the best sales teams I've ever worked with, and they're incredible humans, and I'm excited to see what they're going to accomplish.
So do you give them the standard 2 weeks notice? Do you give them more time for them to consider replacing it? Or was it just, I'm gone and here's your walking papers? What's that process like for you at that level?
Yeah, no. So it's different for everyone. I don't think at an executive level that saying I'm gone, here's your walking papers is the right option. And I arguably don't even think that 2 weeks is the right option. I think as an executive, you have a obligation, not just to yourself and the team, but to the company, to make sure that you're laying out a successful transition plan. To me, at a minimum, that's 30 days. Could be extended anywhere from 45 to 60. And that doesn't even mean that it's in a full-time requirement. Oftentimes, as I'm sure Paul, in a sales role, you give your notice and people are like, all right, thanks, have a good day. You see that more with account executives and BDRs, but I've seen it happen with leadership as well. I think, it's important to say the full story. This is why I'm leaving. This is what I'm doing. And this is how I'm prepared to support you throughout this change, both in a full-time role and in a part-time role, and even in a way that is a non-paid role. I think what you'll find is when executives leave the right way, listen, like anytime I can help with a customer call, like certainly send them my way. If you have a quick question here or there about something we built or the direction and you don't understand, like shoot me a message.
Right.
You have to remain as an ally unless you're leaving for terms that, obviously are a totally different conversation.
All right. So, so Adam, so listen, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a little while now, and I've gotten to know you kind of at an arm's length over the last 3 years. And, in the first time we spoke, as well as in the posts that I see, through your LinkedIn posts, you've shown up to me as a guy who is not just about your number, not just about accolades, not about title. I mean, I think that's probably important on some level, of course, for your lifestyle and things like that. But you show up to me as a guy who is genuinely vested in the people that you work with. And I even noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you have one of your headlines is champion builder. Yeah. And I'd love to know, like, where does that come from? Because it's not that common in everybody. It takes a totally different skill set and mindset to actually do that versus just saying that.
Yeah, I think it's funny. It's probably my biggest strength, excuse me, and at the same time, one of my weaknesses. They talk a lot about first team versus your team, right? If you've ever read Five Dysfunctions of a Team, I'm a fierce advocate for my team. And when I'm saying team in this sense, not my first team. And it goes to kind of building organizations and teams through culture. I've coached my son's sports since he was tiny. Basketball, football. My ex has, 2 older ones that were in competitive cheer that we were always involved in. So I have that natural urge to coach and make people better. But it goes back to when I was first trying to get promoted into management. And I'll keep this story super short, but I didn't get the role 3 times. And I had a VP of sales sit me down and ask me if I wanted to know why I didn't get the role. And I said, of course I do. And I remember like it was yesterday, we were at the San Diego Marriott for a national sales meeting, sitting outside. And she said, you didn't get the role because you're an asshole. I said, excuse me? Like it really took me back. And when she explained, she's like, you're the number 1 rep, this, that, the other, all the great things you do. But like, it's all about you, dude. Like, it's never about helping people. It's never about making people better. It's never about sharing your secrets. And that's not what leadership is. Like, if you really want to be a leader, if you really want to impact people, you got to be willing to give. And it's not about you. It's not about seeing your name in the spotlight. It's about being in the background. It's about putting their names in the spotlight. And I remember that, and this conversation is probably almost 20 years old. But I remember it like it was yesterday. And it was an epiphany for me that if I'm going to lead and I'm going to build, it's got to be all about the people and making them better. So when I talk about building champions and building culture, it's about getting people to do things that they never thought were possible. It's about getting people to realize skills that they didn't know that they had. It's about being the one in the background who is partnering with them and working with them, but giving them the credit to do so. And that's that coach's mentality, right? When you look at the great coaches out there, when you look at the Steve Kerrs of the world, it's not about them. It's about how they make the team better and how they make the team jive. And I think it's really important when you're building a team that you are hiring for area to highlight areas of skill for some other areas of weakness, and that you're building this cohesive team around you. And I try to always make sure that I'm hiring people that are going to make me better, because I'm not perfect. I never will be. But I've taken a very deliberate approach to, and you called it out, this term champion builder, of making folks better and putting others first, and giving back. And I think that the best leaders I know, the best coaches I know, are the ones that do that. People don't want to work for people that are all about them. People don't want to work for people that take their credit. And one of the things that, 2 things I pride myself on as a leader, are number 1, how many people have I got promoted? And promoted doesn't mean to AE to manager. It's promoted to where they want to go. Right. Like I had a BDR at Falcon that he was bounded to, he wanted to be in marketing. That is all he wanted. He's now the head of community. I was able to make that happen for him. And that was one of the best promotions I've ever had. So how many people have I got promoted is number one. And number two, how many people would follow me? If I were to leave and go someplace else, how many people could I pick up the phone and be like, hey, I have a great opportunity here for you? That would be like, dude, like you're there, I'm in, send me the offer letter.
You know, Adam, you think about that conversation, call it 20 years ago now or so. Do you recall, it's obviously still with you, which is amazing. It just sounds like it's one of those moments that like really, you know, transpired into what you're doing now and had a real major, you know, shift into where things are at. But if you think back to when that conversation happened, do you recall how quickly you accepted what was being said to you? What was there resistance right away? Like, what are you talking about?
Not quickly. It's funny, Paul. Like anyone who knows me now versus then will tell you I was a different person. It wasn't quickly. It was you're wrong. A lot of you're wrong. A lot of like that's not me. Of course I'm willing to share. Like, how dare you call me an asshole?
Yeah.
Looking back for the record, like I absolutely was an asshole. It was probably a solid.
Not intentionally though.
No, never intentionally, but I was an a-hole. In a solid several weeks of reflecting, of talking to others. I wasn't married at the time. I didn't have, you know, my son at the time. It was all me, and it was all about being a big shot, right? Like I was very blessed to make great money and work for great companies. And I wanted to show that off. Like I'm number one. And it took me a while to like, I had to sit and think like, do I want to be number one and just keep doing my own thing? Or do I want to be a leader? And why do I want to be a leader? And I think that's the important thing. And I talk about this a lot with my coaching clients. Why do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a leader just because the next step on the, you know, proverbial ladder is like, oh, manager? If that's the reason, and you'll notice I use the word leader and not manager. If that's the reason, you shouldn't do it. I wanted to be a leader because I wanted to make others better. I enjoyed training new reps, and I wanted to help people. And it really hurt me when I was told that like I'm an a-hole because I think that like my secrets are my secrets, because there's the side of me that doesn't want to share my secret sauce with anyone except that one person I'm training because I get paid on what they're doing, versus the other side of me that like wants to help grow, coach, and develop people. And it was an epiphany for me. It was a moment where I had to really reflect and determine what was important to me. And I aligned that like I'm an a-hole, and that if I do want this career in leadership and I want to help people, I have to take a step back and recognize it. And the last part, not to go on a tangent, was recognizing where it came from, and a lot of therapy. And I think, and I say that with pride, I think everyone should have a therapist. I think everyone should go talk to someone. It's the most important thing in the world. Recognizing where that a-holeness and that anger came from and getting the skills to transform it was a pivotal moment in my life.
You know, earlier in our conversation, Adam, you touched on this moment where your phone was still on one night and you kind of had that, hey, wait a second, this has to stop. It's not for me. And I want to take you back to when you and I first met, when we recorded the podcast back in 20, you were just starting with Spot On. And after the podcast, you were kind enough to meet with me again. And I gave you an overview of my SOAR training content. And I'll never forget where I provided you with the overview. And then there was a question I had for you after that. But when you and I met, it was somewhat close to end of our day. We're both in the East. It was maybe, call it 4:30, almost to the 5 o'clock, 5:30 window or so. And I had a question for you as a follow-up, like immediately after we ended our Zoom call. Yeah. And I think I called you and went to voicemail. So I sent you a text. Hey, Adam, do you have a quick second for a quick call? And your text back to me was, hey, Paul, sorry, I'm with my kid. It's kid time now. I'm really sorry. But I'm off the grid. And that was like, look at this guy. Like the guy has just found a way to get that balance in his life where you could have easily taken, hey, son, give me 30 seconds. Let me take this phone call. But you're like, I'm sorry, I'm off the grid now. I'm here. And I just want to commend you on that.
I appreciate that. It's It's taken me a long time. I was always, and you touched on part of it. I did respond to you immediately, although I said no. And I still do that. I have this, my wife hates that I do it, but like I can't see that red, that like I have to respond to people. But I think it was around that time, maybe a little bit, this was 3 years ago. So maybe it was a few years in, but after I got divorced, I didn't spend a ton of time with Zachary when he was little. Like I would leave on Sundays to travel, for work. I would come home on Fridays. I would take the late night call, and I missed a lot. Now it made the divorce easier for him because he was never used to me being home 100% of the time, right? So like I arguably spent more time with him afterwards. But what it made me realize is, going back to like your intention matters, is being very intentional with my time. And ever since then, and I still do it to this day, my ex and I have a fantastic relationship. She actually lives 9 houses down from me. So like he pops back and forth, but we do a week on and a week off. And on the weeks that I have him, I literally block out my calendar and it says Zachary time, do not book from 6 p.m. Eastern on. And I transparently, Paul, don't care if the world is blowing up. I have asked people to reschedule board meetings because of it. And I was initially scared that I would get pushback. And what I actually got was like, of course we'll reschedule that meeting. That's amazing. Nothing's more important than time with your family. And I encourage everyone on my team to do that. You got to remember what matters. When I worked at Hologic, we had a device that eliminated polyps and fibroids from women's uteruses. It literally like helped to prevent cancer. I am known to say to people, like, we are not curing cancer. We are just selling software. There is nothing that can't wait till tomorrow, and you have to be really intentional with your time.
So Adam, talk to me about what you're up to these days. Any particular type of client you're looking at, you're going after? There's a certain vertical for anybody listening that might be, it might be of interest. Talk to me about that.
I appreciate you asking. My sweet spot is working with founders that are seed series. So they have, raised a small amount up to Series B. Typically, they either don't have a sales team, they're doing all of the selling themselves, and they want to transition away from founder-led sales, or they have 1 or 2 sellers in place, but absolutely no process whatsoever. So we're relying on heroics, we're relying on inconsistencies, and they typically bring me in to help build out the sales team, build these processes, and build the playbook. That's one side of the business. The other side of the business, which is arguably the side hustle side, but I love it more than anything in the world, is working with leaders. So AEs that want to become first-time managers, because it's a very different skill set, or new managers that were dropped into the role and, like all of us, given no training whatsoever on how to be a leader. You're a great rep. You'll make a great manager. Go lead this team. That's my passion, coaching those folks to make them better, and build the next generation of sales leaders.
I love it. Adam, I just have one more question for you, because I've been happy to have you back on the podcast, but we're recording this here in the middle of May, and it's a busy time in Florida right now. You've got the Heat in the semis, and you've got the Panthers in the semis.
Yes.
The Panthers just knocked off my Leafs. I can't believe I'm open to talking to you about that. It's still painful for me. But are you a sports fan? Are you into what's happening in Florida right now, in South Florida?
I am not a hockey fan. We are diehard Heat fans. My kid is begging me to go to these games, and they are a bloody fortune. Up in the 300s, you're paying like $500-600. But we are following it very closely. Go Heat! I don't think we're going to do it, but it's if you've ever heard of the app Time Hop that you put on your phone, it connects from your Facebook, your Instagram, and your pictures, and shows you all of your pictures from this day for every single year back, right? So I open up Time Hop today, and it goes from the most recent to the least recent. So it'll start with 1 year, 2 years, 8 years, etc. And the very first picture today was Miami Heat versus Boston Celtics game that me and my kiddo were at. So go Heat.
Well, go Heat is right. Listen, I can't say go Panthers. My blood is blue and white for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but go Heat. I'd love that. Be a great story, especially if the Lakers make the finals as well. What a story that would be, the Lakers versus Heat, right? Given LeBron's connection with both franchises. But Adam, I appreciate you being here, man, today. Thank you. Congratulations on you betting on yourself. Thanks, you've had success in everything else you've done to this point. There's no reason why you won't continue to crush it in this next new venture. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Cheers.
You bet. All right, everybody, let's wrap it up right now. Remember, your intention matters. Why? Because that's the result you'll tend to get. We're out of here. We'll do it again next week. And for Adam, let's go Heat.
Let's go.